Hello and welcome to another episode of Roll for Origin, a history of Super's TTRPGs. We bounce around talking about different systems. I am, of course, Lil Francis, pronouns he, him, and I am joined as always by Mad J.
I'm Matt J, game designer, he, him pronouns, and I write the Play Fearless newsletter.
And links to all this stuff. But today we have a special guest on. I asked him on because he's been playing one of the two games we're going to talk about recently. Rich Rogers, who is the co-creator of the Plus One Forward podcast. He is the editor of Fear of a Black Dragon podcast, and he is the writer of Hit the Streets, Defend the Block, a really good Supers RPG. Rich, thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much, Lowell. What a kind introduction. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan of Roll for Origin.
Yeah.
Whatever. I'm a big fan of Rich Rogers.
Yes, absolutely. Oh. This is a wild one today because my opinion has turned significantly in reading through these things. We are talking today about Smallville and Marvel Heroic. These are Cortex games, incredibly out of print. It is a tough thing, but we're going to do our usual thing. We're going to talk about two of them together, and we're going to talk about some differences. We're going to go through the game system. We're talking about the publication history, and then we're going to talk about the media bits, and then we're going to talk more generally about our thoughts of the game. So, Jay, I'm going to throw it to you.
All right. At its most basic, Cortex, which powers both Smallville and Marvel Heroic in different versions, is a dice pool system, with characters having a variety of elements that they can use to put together that pool. These dice are stepped, D4, D6, D8, etc., with the idea of shifting those dice used throughout. The player rolls the dice and takes the values of the two highest to generate their score. Ones rolled on the player's dice can be used by the GM, as we'll come back to. On the other side, the GM also uses a pool of dice, with some pools being built based on the foe situation and some just generally from their pool. The big innovation that creates tension is that throughout play, the GM's pool of dice grows and changes. Those are the shared elements, but while Smallville and Marvel Heroic both use a version of Cortex called Cortex Plus, they implement it in very different ways. Let's begin with Smallville's implementation of Cortex Plus, and then we can talk about Marvel's reworking. In Smallville, we have leads, player characters, features, significant NPCs who also have sheets, and then extras, everyone else. The GM here is called the Watchtower. Characters have traits, each represented by a die. These traits can be drives, assets, and resources. Drives are further broken into two categories: values, which everyone has: duty, glory, justice, love, power, truth. In addition to the die type, these each get a statement which says something about the character. Relationships are the other drive element, also with a die and a statement describing the relationship. These statements are important because in play you can challenge them to get triple their dice, but at the cost of then stepping down that die for the rest of the episode. Assets are broken into three types: distinctions, abilities, and the other thing. Distinctions are non-powered character traits which have three special effects which can be triggered. The first when you take it, the second when you raise it to a D8, and the third when you go to D12. These are personality bits like big-hearted or smartass. These effects can be many things, like letting you spend plot points for specific rerolls or asset creation, earning them for specific actions, or adding to the trouble pool to get some effect. There's a canon list of these, with more in the supplements, though the rules make it easy to construct your own. Abilities are your above-normal human powers. Smallville operates in a weird space between descriptor and effect-based powers. There is a power list. Each one has an effect category it falls into to help break these up. Attack, movement, etc. It has descriptors you can choose from for color: electricity, psychic, super breath. An abilities limit provides a weakness that can increase an oppositional die or shut down some powers. Finally, special effects are the pool of things that the character can do with this ability when you spend a plot point. Gear is the last kind of asset, but they're pretty much like abilities. There are also resources, extras, and locations which can generate dice to use. Stress traits measure damage in 5 areas: afraid, angry, exhausted, insecure, injured. Dice also represent each of these with larger die types, indicating more effect. So how does resolution work? There are tests and there are contests. You roll your assembled pool and add up the values of the 2 highest dice. The GM uses the dice from any feature sheet or uses a generic trouble pool. Any dice that come up as 1s are complications. If it is the player rolling a 1, the GM can offer a plot point to add that roll die to the trouble pool. If the GM rolls a 1, the player may remove that die or smaller from the trouble pool. Plot points are an important currency throughout the game, allowing you to activate things you can do, add dice to your pool, add a detail to a scene, or add a relationship. That is all interesting, but where Smallville really shines is in its character creation. This is, as I would argue, one of the earliest Session Zero setups, with a completely different structure for play and focused on collaborative building of the series. We've seen some of this with Fate, but keep in mind we're 3 years out from Fate Core. Character creation in Smallville is a combination of life path steps, think of Traveler or Cyberpunk 2020, and relationship mapping. There's more to it, but here's the basics. As a group, you set up your location and time, probably with a little discussion of genre. You add all of the leads as squares on a large sheet or Miro board nowadays. For your pathways, you have stages of picks from the pathways list, with picks limiting your following choices. Choices are marked on this pathways map, establishing new elements like important NPCs and drawing arrows between things. So a pick that establishes a connection between 2 leads has a line between them. Each line has a die type associated with it. These relationships do not have to be reciprocal. Throughout this process, you have the opportunity to establish traits, drive, assets, resources, and sometimes to step up the dice of already established ones. What you end up with is a massive sprawling relationship map, which makes the entanglements from Hearts of Wulin look like a straight line graph. It is amazing, but we'll talk more about that in our section on our thoughts. Marvel Heroics largely keeps the basic mechanical elements of Smallville's implementation of Cortex Plus, but ditches its approach to both character creation and storytelling. While elements on a character's datasheet still often reflect their drives and goals, the focus is on superhero adventure, action, and combat over interpersonal relationships, daily life stories, or even just non-powered aspects. While the 2 games share a basic mechanical resolution approach, they feel worlds apart in almost every other aspect and vibe.
Now, is there anything else we need to say about the mechanics before we go on to the next section? Because I know you both have played it more than I have, and I kind of sketched out the mechanical side of this.
Well, I'll say a couple things. I had the pleasure of playing Smallville with Jesse Ross, creator of Trophy and a number of other games, as the Watchtower, because Cam Banks loves coming up with a different name for a GM for every darn game he creates. And then in the middle of the year, as a side story within my Masks game, I ran a series of Marvel Heroics. So I've played and run both. They feel very fresh, and I think that's how I was able to get invited here. But one of the things I think is super interesting about Smallville is that it feels a little bit the way I first started playing Dogs in the Vineyard, where boom, you roll some dice, and then the person on the other side, either Watchtower or another player, can give in or they can hit back. And if they hit back and they exceed you, that turns into an attack on you. And so there's this back and forth of ever escalating things, which I think is super dramatic and ever more dangerous. So it's very exciting. And it feels like it's emulating that media of the, hey, it's sweeps week and we're going to have this big, huge fight against a person. And I love that. It also can be low stakes. Like you can continue to dig at people's stress, use their stress dice against them, because when a person takes stress, that damage, you as a player going against them can pick up those dice. And so that back and forth is really interesting. Aspects of that live within Marvel Heroic, but in Smallville, it was a little less elegant because you do the resolution and okay, you've overcome it. Now you pick up those dice and you roll your stress. In Marvel Heroic, they make it a little quicker. You're already rolling your effect die within the pool, which is fun because it's fast and you can go, oh, yeah, well, I've got a 6 here, but I've got a 6 on my D10. I want the 6 on my D10 to be my effect die. Therefore, you're taking a D10 of effect. Very, very different from the way that stress worked in Smallville. Those were a couple of the things that I was thinking of as you were talking about the base mechanics. And the other one is advancement. Marvel Heroic uses milestones, which I first saw in Shadow of Yesterday and also saw in Lady Blackbird. I love that. Oh, it's also in Cartel. Really fun system to have player-directed goals that when you go along the track, you're getting some XP, and then you can actually close off that track. Hey, I've achieved this thing. This part of my story is done. You move on to other milestones. Smallville, however, has a very moment-to-moment, very episodic advancement in that you build a growth pool throughout the session based off of challenging your values, taking damage and stress, and then you roll that growth pool against a target of, okay, I want to raise my asset. I want to raise my value. Watchtower, or the GM, will roll a set number of dice against your growth pool, and you have to beat them to be able to increase the thing that you want to increase. And if you blow it, then you just move dice around. Oh, well, I still want to change it, but you got to lower something else, which can be super
when we come to the
frustrating.
end, I want to talk. I know that you had said that you played some variants when you were playing Smallville. So we'll talk about that at the end. Rich, can I have you talk about the pub history for Smallville and Marvel?
Be happy to. The story of Cortex starts with Margaret Weiss Productions, but it doesn't end with it. Margaret Weiss Productions really begins with the creation of the Dragonlance setting for TSR way back in 1984, which, along with some of the other foundational adventures like their Ravenloft, changed the course and kind of material being produced for Dungeons & Dragons, as well as beginning TSR's expanding line of fiction. Changes at TSR over the late 1980s meant that Weiss and Hickman left to focus on freelance writing. In the late 1990s, artist Larry Elmore approached the pair with a new fantasy setting called Lorem, and write us in if you know how to pronounce it better than me, which they would eventually turn into a series of novels. At the same time, Don Perrin, then married to Weiss, helped develop an RPG for the setting called Sovereign Stone. The new company, with Weiss at the head, would become Sovereign Press. Sovereign Stone itself had a dice step system, a very proto-version of what would eventually become Cortex. However, it didn't do hugely well. So the company pivoted to D20 in 2001, because everyone pivoted to D20 around 2001. They added new source books, as well as redoing the original books with a new system. However, D&D 3.5 Implosion in 2003 sounded the death knell for that line. They closed shop on that in 2004. At around the same time, in 2002, WotC licensed Dragonlance to Sovereign Press. That resulted in about 5 years of support for the setting, with some great releases appeasing old school DL fans. But in 2007, WotC called the license back in. Calling the license back in is something we'll talk a lot about as we go on with Margaret Weiss Productions. During the same period, around 2007, Sovereign Press refounded as Margaret Weiss Productions. Even as they were working on Dragonlance, they began to look into acquiring license for their new house system, Cortex. The first of these was Serenity, a game based on the movie of the Firefly TV show. Later, there would be a Firefly RPG, which used materials from the TV show. It was confusing. MWP, Margaret Weiss Productions, supported that with a handful of books. Several more licensed games followed, including a few one-and-done games for Supernatural, Demon Hunters, and Battlestar Galactica. They also released a Cortex generic book in 2008. In 2010, they refined the system with what they called Cortex Plus. Smallville was the first of these. This made for an interesting choice coming late in the show's lifetime. The same year, the 10th, and final season that aired. Smallville would be supported by 2 supplements. The Watchtower Report would offer new options, powers, mechanics, and character write-ups. On the other hand, the Smallville High School Yearbook focused on running games set in a high school junior college atmosphere with new life paths, events, cliques, and more. It aimed at capturing the vibe of the early Smallville seasons. They're all gorgeous, well laid out, super well written, and make great use of the licensed assets they have available. The other Cortex Plus release, Leverage, is equally good, though it only got a core book release and then 2 bundled collections of PDF articles. At the same time, according to Designers and Dragons, Margaret Weiss was starting to consider closing out the company, in part due to the challenge of licenses. However, they ended up picking up the Marvel license 8 years after the last failed attempt that was Marvel Universe. Ugh.
Yeah. We're going to cover that at some point, and Jay's going to have some things to say.
Yeah, that game was awesome. Whatever.
Oh, man.
Creative director Cam Banks assembled an all-star crew of designers, including Rob Donahue and Jesse Scoble, to work on the design, with a number of other big names adding their efforts. And a smaller name, Adam Minnie, a close personal friend of mine. In 2012, the Marvel Heroic base game was released, with a new form factor and approach with event books. 2 of these came out, Civil War and Annihilation. A few other small books were released, including Runaways, Young Avengers, and the now forgotten 50-State Initiative, which was a cooler idea than, you'd think.
Mm-hmm.
The game seemed to do well, but by the following year, Weiss pulled the plug, citing sales versus the cost of the license. Books in the pipeline were shut down, including the nearly complete Age of Apocalypse event book. Pour one out for Age of Apocalypse. There was only a week between the announcement of the shutdown and the complete end of sales. If you didn't buy the PDFs, at that point, you're kind of out of luck.
Rich did buy the PDFs. I did not. I have regrets.
I have 3 copies of the basic game on my shelf right now.
Maybe in the thought section, we'll talk about where Cortex has gone since here, but there is a long history after this. I do want to talk about the media context for some of this as licensed games. So, let's start with the Smallville side of things. The 1990s had been a very weird time for superhero television. There had been a really strong series of animated shows. So we had Batman, the animated series. We had the Superman follow-up. We had X-Men. And then there had been a couple of live-action shows that tried to start something. So in the very early 1990s, we had The Flash and Mantis. And yeah, for a couple of seasons of that. It's one of those shows I love because you can see second season, we have half the budget, if that. The one that probably set the groundwork for Smallville, though, is Lois and Clark, which runs from 1994 to 1998. Superman, adult, with a lot of interpersonal and soap opera issues that are just as important as the super stuff. So Smallville Season 1 launches in late 2001 on the WB, with it switching over to be a CW show in 2006. For those of you who don't remember all of the whole network bullshit that was going on before cable took over everything, apparently this was originally pitched as a young Bruce Wayne show, which we eventually would get with Gotham. So the WB had for several years been a strong source of black sitcoms, and Seventh Heaven, a soap opera that set up some of the later WB CW fare, but there's this weird turn that happens by the late 1990s where they built on these great black comedies. They push those out the door, and we get 97, Buffy the Vampire Slayer becomes a hit, and they go, let's lean into that. So we get young adult soap and the rise of real paranormal romance as a genre. So there's a combination of things here: Dawson's Creek, Felicity, Charmed, Roswell, Popular, Gilmore Girls, Angel.
Gilmore Girls!
Yes. Smallville, it launches in 2001 and it draws teens, but it also draws a male demographic, which is something that they'd struggled with up until this point. They also added a few other successful shows with some real long legs: Reba, Sabrina, Everwood, One Tree Hill, and of course Supernatural. So we get some more of the YA paranormal stuff. They also tried to capitalize on another DC property in 2002 with Birds of Prey, which I had high hopes for, and it absolutely failed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the WB and UPN both end up shuttered in 2006, and all of that is shifted over to this new CW. And for me, at least, and maybe for you, CW is the network I associate with hot teen angst.
Right.
Even though it starts with the WB, it is this that I associate it with. Smallville itself lasts 10 seasons with increasingly convoluted plots and diminishing ratings. We get that last season of it. It's a final season that has Darkseid. It has the return of Lex Luthor. It has an adult Clark. There had been an Aquaman spinoff planned, but that fell through, and we'll talk about that later. So we get Smallville out of there, but then almost immediately after that, we get the beginning of the Arrowverse with Arrow in 2012, Flash 2014, Supergirl 2015, Legends of Tomorrow,
Right.
Black Lightning, Batwoman, Stargirl, and finally Superman and Lois. And I really do think if Smallville had lasted, the game had lasted a little bit longer, if that could have gone over into the Arrowverse, what that might have looked like.
Wow.
Right.
I find that really interesting. On the other side of things, we have Marvel Heroic, which in our previous discussions, I've talked about events, but really Marvel Heroic leans into the event culture of comics. The two major releases, Civil War and Annihilation, both represented very recent, successful hotness. Those had come out in 2006 and 2005. And comics readers at that point would have been familiar with them and their aftermath. And so we also get the weird set of smaller source books that are representing like new things like the 50 States Initiative. It seems weird. But then the one that gets canceled, the one that we don't get, is a real change away from that. That's Age of Apocalypse, which would have appealed to an older demographic, readers who had experienced the X-Men in the 1990s. And like, I wonder what events would have been on the table if that had continued. Would we have seen House of M? Would we have seen Secret Invasion? Or might we have seen older things like Inferno and Secret Wars? Ooh. I think that's right. Really interesting. It's also interesting that they choose to do Civil War, which is a very problematic in terms of superhero comics and superhero narratives and things like that, but they lean into it because it is so hot and popular. We'll probably come back and talk about that here in the thoughts section. Rich, you played Smallville of us the most recently. So do you want to talk about that experience?
For sure. I've played a number of live path games. The biggest in my mind is Burning Wheel, which I think has an exemplary life path system. Very intricate. Feel like I'm doing algebra problems, but it's kind of fun. Smallville, I love the way that it sets up. It's a commitment. It is the most session zero going to be a whole session thing that I've ever experienced. And it is so collaborative that I don't see how you could possibly do it before you show up at the table with everyone else. So it's wonderful for getting buy-in and creating a world together. Terrible for Jim Bob, who can't show up at session zero, because, man, you are really going to have to play catch up and have a bunch of, we're going to say, we got to leave an empty space. Because what you're doing is you walk through your life path step by step. We all go through step one, and then we add things to the map, the literal map and the relationship map and our characters. And you go through this process of evolving your character, growing the city, creating and establishing relationships. Then, as some assets, and all of them have their own little rules because Ken Banks likes rules, you could start off with a location that is like, that's my thing. Oh, you've added too many different people added to it. Now it's a a shared resource. And I think that's
Right.
interesting. You can evolve up different kinds of assets based on who pays into it.
Right.
That's something I've never seen before or since. And I'm like, wow, that's wild. You took that location away from me. But also, that's kind of neat because now we both care about it. We walk in, sit down at the table with this giant blank piece of paper. And by the end, it's a giant plate of spilled spaghetti of arrows going all kinds of different ways, pointing at things and dice values and built characters that have these really strong relationships that some go two ways, some of them are just one way, which I think is super interesting. Yeah, I don't even think about you versus person who has all this angst about the person who doesn't think about them. It's really cool. I think it's my favorite session zero I've had in a very long time was our Smallville experience.
I second everything that Rich says. What I would add is the steps are conceptual stages of that person's life. And I think that's important because everyone's moving through those conceptual phases of life all at the same time. So we're all teenagers, they were all in junior college, they were all in, whatever those concepts are, you're all moving through that. And that makes it worse for the person who didn't show up for session zero because they get none of that. They get an abbreviated version, which it doesn't even match up. The other thing I will say is when you're done, that's the whole campaign right there on that sheet, right? You don't need anything else. Everything is right there. And I love that part. And everyone knows, right? So if I show up 3 or 4 games later and I pull a thing off the sheet, everyone knows what that is because we were there when we put it on the sheet. And that is a beautiful thing to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's even better than way back when you saw the MCU timeline. Wait, in 6 years, I get the 4th Spider-Man film?
Yeah, I think I loved as the GM or the GM, the GM, I don't really have to add anything. If I'm going to, I can tweak things or as we're doing session zero, but I never really have to pull in anything strange or new as we're playing. I can just pull stuff right up off the sheet because there's so much stuff sitting there. So I agree with Rich, yeah.
I do want to stress this. This is the thing that absolutely, I have a love-hate with Cortex. I have played Cortex before, and I think I've had this conversation with both Jay and Rich before. But in the past, every time I played Cortex, I would walk away and the rules would go out of my head and I would completely forget them. And they did not stick with me. I played Leverage, I played Marvel. It kind of wouldn't stick with me. And it wasn't until I sat down and read Smallville that I was like, holy shit. A, I get this. And B, how is this game out in 2008?
Mm-hmm.
How is it? It is so ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
It's doing a ton of the stuff that we associate with Fate. It's doing interpersonal relationship stuff in a new and exciting way. It's got this relationship map. It is stunning to me that this didn't become huge. And I don't know why. I don't know why we don't have this system stripped of its Smallville stuff out there and people playing this.
It could be the PBTA of TV drama, easy peasy. Like, it is so good at television drama.
Right.
So very good at it. It does not need the superpowers. I love the superpowers, but the core of that flavor of Cortex Plus isn't something that I've really seen in any other Cortex stuff, and I haven't seen anywhere else as pure as it is in Smallville. It's crazy.
Right.
I've never seen relationship mapping in this way where it is not just because we mentioned the life paths of Traveler and Cyberpunk 2020, and those are both interesting, but they are completely solo play. They are parallel play things in a way that this just isn't.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Now, Jay, you've had more experience with Cortex generally. What's your impression of that? Have other versions of Cortex approached this, or have they gone in a different direction? What's your experience with that?
So for me, my deep dive came about because of my work with Lifted. And I'm aware in Marvel Heroic that a lot of folks that were bent out of shape, that there wasn't a better character generation for Marvel Heroic, right? It's pretty random, and folks were kind of unsatisfied with that. So I didn't want to redo that. So I started digging through General Cortex, and that's when I really discovered the pathways and started digging into that. And then I started looking, where else is it? And I don't see it anywhere else outside of like third party, just individual people stuff, right? I don't see it in any product out there other than Smallville. I love it. I think I would think all the Cortex games should use it. I think it's the killer app of Cortex. I don't know why it isn't. You usually get player buy-in when we put people through it. I think Smallville has 10 steps, but it doesn't have to be that long. It could be 5. Mm-hmm. And I think you still get a good, strong relationship map at the end out of that.
I'll also say, like the high school yearbook, it demonstrates that you can take the basic bits of Smallville and do a very different thing because it has a different tone to it. It's got a lot of extra different approaches. It's got a new path. And it kind of models how you could do a very different game, more of a Monster Hearts kind of thing with that I think would be really fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like if we look at Cortex Plus, Cortex Prime as a tool set like GURPS, then I feel like Smallville is the best expression of that tool set.
Yeah, but there's another generation after Cortex Plus, right?
Yeah, that's Cortex Prime.
Cortex Prime.
Yeah.
And that's where we get the Cortex Hacker's Guide.
That's before Cortex Prime.
Okay. Wait, so that's before Cortex Prime. So that's Cortex Hacker's Guide. And then,
right.
Okay. And then
there's a Cortex game book. A Cortex game handbook that has Cortex Prime. Yeah. Cortex has got so many flavors and names, and it's crazy.
And then the most recent thing with Cortex was the Dragon Prince, I want to say.
Tales of Zadia? Yeah,
Tales
I
of Zadia.
think it's Zadia. Yep, that is the last thing they put out. There's also Hammerheads, which is a Cortex Prime iteration you can see on Direwolf Digital's website. Don't think there's any physical anything of Cortex Prime. I think it's all online, which is good and also problematic.
Right. If I remember the Kickstarter correctly, Cortex Prime was going to have the game handbook come out. And then I think there were like 3 or 4 volumes of contributing author settings and stuff.
Now, you both have Smallville and Marvel Heroic. What is Marvel Heroic doing? What is it doing well? What is it doing interestingly?
Yeah, it's the beat-em-up game, right?
It is. Yeah, it's a certain flavor of comic book. It's event books. It's high action. The game says there are 2 types of scenes: action scenes and transition scenes. Transition scenes are where you do the role playing, but they exist to transition you to another action scene. And if you're on board with that, it does it really, really well. But if you want to do some like role playing stuff, the game is not really there to support you. You're just going off and doing your own thing. Maybe you're hitting a milestone. There are some milestones that are RP related, but generally you stepped away from the mechanics of what Marvel Heroic cares about.
Right. I don't disagree. At cons, at tables, I felt like people were trying to answer, can the Thing take the Hulk? Let's do it, right? And or things like that, right? What's it going to take down Dr. Doom, right? That's what they want to see. And they choose their characters, and we're going at it, whatever the scenario is. And we're rolling the dice, and we're playing through that. And if I play that same scenario 4 or 5 times, I'm going to get 4 or 5 different answers. And folks seem to be happy with that at the tables. So, and that's why I say it's the beat-em-up game.
It's so interesting to me because going all the way back to the 1980s, it is Marvel that begins with superhero RPGs with the idea of role play first.
Right.
With Karma and all of those things. Like it's still about fights and things like that, but it is much more engaged with doing the daily life and all of those kinds of things. And later on, we get some of that in the Saga version, but not much. And then we get Marvel Heroic, and then not to dump too much, but I also think that the Marvel Multiverse RPG is the same way. It's a fight game, and I don't care for it.
Right. Yeah.
Eventually we'll talk about that. What do you like about Marvel Heroic, though? Because it does have a huge fan base. A lot of people really love it.
Folks want the Lord of the Rings experience where all that whole cast is there. Gandalf is there, the hobbits are there, right? But nobody wants to be the hobbit for the most part. And I feel like if we did an Avengers movie RPG session, nobody wants to play Hawkeye. But I feel like Marvel Heroic lets Hawkeye stand in the same scene with Thor, and he can contribute on an equal level. He's not overshadowed or overpowered narratively by Thor, or even mechanically by Thor. He can still move the needle, and I think people love that. And I don't know too many other games that let you do that. Most games were all leveling up at the same time. Clearly, Thor, on the character sheet, has a lot more powers and options.
Right.
When you do the math, consolidating everything down to D6s, he's got way more dice, right? But the way the mechanics work, Hawkeye can still contribute like Thor can in a scene. And I think that's important. I think that's a killer app for Marvel Heroic, right? That makes that work, and it gets everybody engaged at the table.
A few things I've really enjoyed about Marvel Heroic are all tied up into the event idea, because with milestones, with XP, where, okay, if you do this thing, if you mention this thing, you mark 1 XP. If you put yourself at risk for a thing, you get 2 or maybe 3 XP. And then if you do this huge thing, you close it out and that milestone's done. That's super cool. You have 2 to 3 per character. So you've got a few different directions to go with role play or motivations and actions you can do within a thing. But then you go a step further into the event, there are event-based milestones. When you guys face so-and-so thing, then everybody marks X or Y XP. When one person goes to the other side, then they can mark this. And so you incentivize with that sweet XP, lots of different actions that can hit the tropes of what you might see in that event. I thought that was really exciting stuff, because I literally was printing it out. I'm putting it on the table. Hey, if any of you guys switch sides in my Age of Apocalypse thing, you get these milestones and this power set. And sure, it was mechanics first, but also it was pretty tantalizing and interesting.
Right.
It's interesting. The other game I was thinking about with milestones that, if I were going to do Smallville, I might steal this for that, is Seventh Sea has build your own milestones. Like, to get things, you build a story that you have to do, and you establish what the steps are on that story to get your thing. So that, I think that's kind of interesting. Event books. We've got Civil War. We've got the mini event book that's in the main book of Marvel Heroic. That is the Breakout. We've got Annihilation. These are all highly determined, highly delineated, in a way that I think does flash back to, now I'm going back to the old Marvel superhero role-playing game. They had a lot of modules that were very, how do I put this? Very classically, this is how the story is going to go, railroady. But it feels different to me when you've got something that is that railroady and it's a story that everybody knows. How does that work? I don't know. Like, do people want to do that? Do you think that's the appeal, is, hey, I do want to play out this cool story that I read?
I'm with you, right? It hurts my head. I don't have an answer for you.
Okay, good.
I will quote something. He's another player I know. He's in Slack I'm in. He says, it may be that it's a yardstick. It's a reference point. I say, I played Civil War. You say you played it, but we didn't play together. But I say, so what did you do about Thor's hammer when it was stuck there? Right? And now we're having this conversation about experiences we had separately, but we both went through the same event. And he thinks that there's some points in there. There's some merit in there that people like that.
That's really interesting. It's interesting to me that we have these Marvel events. And I think about, okay, well, if this were a DC game, what events would we have? And it's like Identity Crisis and Blackest Night and Flashpoint. Right, yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to fucking play through those. And I helped write Flashpoint. So, I don't want to play in that shit. So it is wild to me, the tone of those kinds of things. Any last things that we want to talk about with Smallville, Marvel, to come to some wrap on what is it? I'm just going to say I love Smallville. I want people to run it. I want to see more of it.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
We've heaped a lot of praise on Smallville. I've really, really enjoyed the game. Look forward to playing it more. Not sure I have the chops to run it, because it takes a certain level of system mastery. One of the things about Smallville as a player that I found challenging is that you have 6 values and you have to have declarative statements about all 6 values.
Mm-hmm.
And all 6 of them need to be strong and, notice the quote marks, kind of wrong, because they need to be something that you'll challenge.
Right.
And then when you challenge them, it's talked about during the mechanics aspect, you step it down. It goes down a die step, and it can go down multiple if you keep challenging it in one session. And then you have a choice at the end of the session. Okay, are you going to hold to that, which means you got to move some dice around and you don't have to rewrite your value? Or are you going to get some growth out of that, which means you have to write another one? So you got to write 6 really, like, I felt like I was writing burning wheel level things I care about. And then I got to rewrite it. And then I got to rewrite it 2 sessions down the road. I'm 10 sessions. I had 6 values. Think of it. That's work, man. It got laborious at times of like, I think I'm going to stick to this one value because I don't care about glory anymore. It wore me out a little bit.
At first I was going to push back a little bit on the system mastery thing, but after your explanation here, I think the GM, and I think it is system mastery, at the beginning, maybe session 0, session 1, should say, hey, look, I know there's 6 of these. Pick 2.
Mm-hmm.
2 strong statements for 2, right? And as you challenge those and those go up and down, and you get to that point where you have to decide, you can also revise one of the other 4 while you're in that moment. And then over time, if we're playing long, you will end up with stronger ones as we move ahead. Especially if you step that one back, then you choose another one, right? And you make a stronger statement about that one. So I think you're right. All that to say, yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. It's interesting because this is the era of before Fate Core where characters were made with like a dozen aspects. Like that was the thing that was going on. All these games that had all of these statement things that often felt like the cart before the horse.
Right.
You know, and I sometimes feel like Star Trek Adventures has value statements for your characters.
Right.
But one of the things they do is they give you a big old sample list of those that you can play with and then modify from. You know, I hit this cart before the horse thing with that book of proactive role playing where they want you to make up goals for your character. But that only can happen if you already know the world and you already know what the game is going to be like. It's like doing that early on feels like we are front loading on that. Rich, I actually want to take what you said because to kind of pull back from the wrap up here, you told me that when you went to play Smallville, you played it for a little while and then they were like, here are some changes that we want to make to how the game operates. What were those changes?
Oh, well, I let off with, I hate growth pool. And I said, but we're going to do it rules as written for a bit just to see how it goes. And I think by the second time that one of our players, Adam Mini, Cortex guru, like he's really, really smart and he would push hard and he was getting D12s in his growth pool. And then at the end, he's like, okay, I'm going to raise this value. And then the Watchtower would grab their couple of dice and you do a roll off. And if you blow it, too bad. That was disincentivizing to me. So what Jesse did, he did a bunch of research. There are a bunch of Cortex hackers out there. That is a very hacky game. That's why there's 2 or 3 different hack books that they've released. And one of the growth pool modifications was more of a, okay, you roll and there's a minimum of points that you end up with. And it basically defaults to an XP system. So you build growth, you roll against a set target number, and then based off of that result, you get a certain amount of XP. And the XP always goes up because Rich is addicted to numbers go up gaming. I can't help it.
I need that dopamine.
Yeah, 100%. Jay, anything else you want to say about Marvel or Smallville?
I enjoyed my time with both of those games. I said it earlier, and I'll close out with, I feel like Smallville is the best expression of the Cortex system. I think it's got the best of everything, of all the different dials and widgets and things. So I love it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's super expensive to buy the physical copy these days, but I will say it's a great, great game. And I had a physical copy that I had bought at Barnes and Noble on like a sale table, and then I like traded it away, and I hugely regret that.
Oh my
Having
goodness.
sat down, because like when I sat down and read it in 2009, I was like, I don't get this. I don't understand what's going on here. This makes no sense to me. Am I going to draw a relationship map? This is not theatrics. I don't want to play that, you know?
I want to play that. The hell is going on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. Well, thank you both for coming on. And Rich, thank you so much for lending your expertise to this. We really appreciate it.
Thank
Yes.
you for giving me the word expertise. I'm going to put it on my CV. This was great. I love talking about these two games. I really enjoyed this year of play, and keep going with Roll for Origin. Love the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll have links to everybody's stuff in the show notes. This is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. Of course, you can subscribe. If you like this podcast, you can support the community on Patreon. It supports this and Roll for Mutation and the Open Hearth podcast itself. If you listen to this feed and you haven't picked it up, hey, a couple episodes back, we did our Game of the Year episode in which Rich talked about Smallville there. So check that out. Thank you both so much. And listeners, that is our show.